Dr. Qudwa, many thanks for this interview at this extremely critical time. I'll divide my questions roughly into four sections. One about Fatah and yourself in the West Bank. The other about Hamas, and thirdly about what you think is going on with the Arab states and with Israel, and what your message is to the world in general. But just to start with, can you describe in your own words what you think has been happening over the last 9 days, not just in the West Bank and in Gaza, but in 48 and also in Jerusalem?
Well, yes, of course. Let's start that the whole thing started with Israeli invasion of Al-Aqsa Mosque during the last 10 most religious important days for Palestinian people and specifically for Muslims. In addition to Israeli actions related to evicting many Palestinians from their homes, second time or maybe third time, in Sheikh Jarrah, Jerusalem. So Israel have been doing the usual things against Jerusalemites in Jerusalem. And only after that, the exchange between Hamas and Israel started. Hamas sent its rockets, and Israel responded with outrageous, disproportionate, huge amount of fire against the Palestinian people generally in Gaza, causing a huge number of deaths and injuries and untold destruction and suffering of the population there. After that, Palestinian people in the 1948 part started to react, and we have seen interracial or intercommunal clashes between Palestinians and Jews in many mixed cities. In addition, of course, to the situation in the West Bank itself, where we did have concrete reactions by an important segments of the Palestinian people in the West Bank. So generally, it is not acceptable for the usual narration that Hamas started all this, the proof that it started to fire rockets against Israel. And it's not acceptable also to speak of Palestinian attacks against Israelis. In the heart of it, it's the long-lasted Israeli policies, all kind of negative, outrageous policies against the Palestinian people everywhere that led to the current situation and the common unified reaction by all parts of the Palestinian people everywhere. And that include, by the way, people in the diaspora, outside Palestine, outside the region. And we see every day demonstrations and reactions and solidarity actions by Palestinian communities, in addition to their friends, our friends from all over the world.
There's talk at the moment of a ceasefire being arranged tonight. Even if that comes about, according to your analysis, this is not going to just disappear, because it's not going to disappear in 48, it's not going to disappear in Jerusalem. The next time an Israeli court evicts a family from Sheikh Jarrah, it's going to blow up again. That's correct, isn't it? It's not just going to disappear with a ceasefire.
Oh, I don't think so. Furthermore, I think what has been happening proves beyond doubt the futility of the overall Israeli policies towards the Palestinian people. That policy that considers all mandated Palestine as Jewish or as Israelis, that negates the national existence and the national rights of the Palestinian people, that denies the Palestinian people their basic rights, including, for instance, the right to self-determination, that maintains a unhuman siege against Gaza, etc., systematic oppression, of course, all kind of horrible things, the kind of which no other state can escape with it without accountability, except in the case of Israel, thanks to the automatic protection of the U.S. administrations, successive, I would say, U.S. administrations, in spite of some differences between one and another. So this overall policy has proven, as I said, as futile, as ineffective, as failing policy. And definitely the mere fact of reaching kind of ceasefire now in Gaza is not going to do the trick. It's not going to solve all the problems, and most probably we'll see more of the same, more of the flare-up situations and more of confrontations, and maybe even one more confrontation in Gaza or between Gaza and Israel itself.
What should happen with the Palestinian leadership? Should it combine now? What should be the response? Are you still, for instance, wanting to contest? Are the elections still on? Are you still actively pushing for the elections to be held? Tell me your calculation now.
Now, nobody knows what happened to the elections, to tell you the truth. And actually, there was election planned, organized, and all of a sudden, somehow, someone canceled the elections, or to be specific, postponed the elections sine dias, without fixing any new date, which practically means canceling the elections. And that in itself gives you an example of how bad the situation is, how bad the internal Palestinian situation is, and proves once more the need for a broad and deep change in the Palestinian situation. We can't go on like that. We need drastic changes, one that change the internal politics and internal policies, and change also the Palestinian policy vis-a-vis the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Is, in your view, Mahmoud Abbas still fit to be president?
Well, I wouldn't like to personalize things, but I think the current situation is untenable. We need a change, and change in my mind means changing personalities, changing policies, as well as changing positions. As I said, the continuation of what we have now will lead to only more problems and more catastrophes for the Palestinian people, and that's one of the reasons why we need to affect change.
Before you got expelled from Fatah, you described yourself as Fatah to the bone. You were a very significant member of it. You were a member of the Central Committee. What does Fatah stand for now, do you think?
Now, let me clarify one thing, that I do not recognize any legitimacy of the action taken by the Central Committee, or to be more specific, by the influential party in the Central Committee. I do belong to Fatah, and I am Fatah, and I think that what we have seen is not the end of the story. The story is still long, and we will see different chapters. I have no doubt in my mind. And this is not a personal bag that anyone can carry here and there. So let's put this aside, and to answer your question, what Fatah stands for. You know, Fatah is basically an important principles and very important ideas and history and column of martyrs and huge struggling records against Israel and all the enemies of the Palestinian people. So it's larger, big things, a rather big thing. And definitely what we see now is not, at least from my personal point of view, is not the Fatah that I know. And when we established, by the way, the National Democratic Assembly, to my mind, when we say national and democratic, this is Fatah that I know. And the program we came up with, the program of action, I think befits Fatah exactly the way I understand it and the way that it should be. And it is going to be one way or another. Hopefully, if change or when change takes place in the Palestinian arena generally, the change within Fatah will be a part of it. There is no doubt in my mind.
Abu Rudaina, who is the presidential spokesman, said very recently, he said this in the past, but I think he said it yesterday or today, that he defended security cooperation with Israel as a sovereign right of the Palestinian people, for the defense of the Palestinian people. Do you agree with that?
No, of course not. But the problem in my mind is not that there is security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli authorities. What we have now is much worse than coordination. Unfortunately, parts of our structures, security structures, is linked somehow to the Israeli security structures. So it's hard to call this coordination. Had we had the coordination per the agreements reached, probably the situation would have been much different. In any case, it's not sovereign right. It's something that some of us are pursuing contrary to the national interests of the Palestinian people. This is one of the things that needs to be changed. There's no doubt about that.
When we negotiated Oslo and all the other agreements, 48 and Jerusalem were excluded from those agreements. Do you think now this position is still tenable, that a Palestinian leadership has to now also stand for the Palestinians of 48 and Jerusalem as well, as the West Bank and Gaza?
Yeah, to my knowledge, Oslo agreements, or to be specific, the Declaration of Principles of 1993 did not exclude Jerusalem. Actually, specifically, it states Jerusalem as one of the things that needs to be negotiated between the two sides.
Granted, yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah. That in itself was an important backtracking by the Israeli side. Anyway, to make things simple, I mean, there is no need to have any theoretical discussion about Oslo. Suffice to mention that the Israeli governments, successive Israeli governments, in practice, canceled the agreements and made all kind of steps, all kind of measures, put all kind of measures in place that contradicts the agreement and violate the agreements, and I would say even represent the antithesis of the agreements. I give you one example. For instance, the Israeli government brought back the military government to the occupied territory under the name, the coordinator of the government activities in the territories. That's precisely the military government, and returned the civil administration of the government. The agreements clearly specifies the need for withdrawing the military government and abrogating the civil administration, because their existence is the antithesis of any idea for self-government. So in a way, in many ways, actually, the Israeli government abrogated those agreements and buried them. Not only killed them, but buried them. There is no clear Palestinian position in this regard, and I personally think that the right position is to state that, what I have just said, and to add to it, that from a Palestinian point of view, we will maintain certain parts of the agreement, especially those in the interest of the Palestinian people, such as the existence of the authority, and maybe things related to our money, that's the Palestinian money, because we need that. And in addition, I think we need to have an overall strategy how to end the agreements in the same way, but in the same way the Israeli did, but from our point of view, in a way that ensure the Palestinian interest and how to maintain and develop those rights.
You have been a critic of Hamas in the past, and yet we see now Hamas flags flying along with Fatah flags in Nablus. We saw lots of Hamas flags also in Al-Aqsa, and there are big demonstrations. Do you acknowledge that Hamas is now gaining popularity in the West Bank?
Yes, I do acknowledge that, and that's obvious, and it's only natural thing given the state of affairs. But by the way, was I strong critic of Hamas? Yes and no. Yes, because we have differences and we have a problem of Gaza, and we need to achieve reunification, geographic and political. But no, in a way that I have never considered them the enemy, and I was strongly pushing for achieving reunification and ending the split. Unfortunately, I did not think that the last deal between Hamas and Fatah, or part of Hamas and part of Fatah, on the elections and related matters as a deal that would get us closer to ending the split. Actually, I saw it as a deal that would entrench the split and would not realize the Palestinian interest. And I believe that experience showed that was the right evaluation. So in short, Hamas represent the political Islam, if you wish, or political Islamist, and as such, we do have differences and we do have problems, but they are part of the Palestinian people, and I do hope that things will develop on the Palestinian scene generally in a way that we would have at the end three major trends. One is the national democratic trend in the middle, and one that is national Islamist or Islamic trend, and one that is national left trend. If we succeed in doing that, we will have achieved something very important for the interests of the Palestinian people and the future of our kids.
And so you're in favor of forming a national government with Hamas and also including Hamas in the PLO?
Yes, but not only that. I think we need a package on which we should achieve national consensus. We should start with ending the split and achieving the reunification, i.e. changing the situation in Gaza, because in my mind there are three requirements for achieving the reunification. One is the return of Gaza Strip to the political and administrative Palestinian system, and two, serious sharing or common system, political system that should be open to everybody with the participation of everybody, including in the PLO. And three, we need to do that based on political program and not just a few words here and there. That should be clear, the common denominator on the basis of which we rebuild the PLO and we achieve serious and significant unification or unity of our people. And if we do that, then of course the road for the PLO will be open for the entry of all forces, including Hamas, and the road for new government with the participation of Hamas and all other forces also should be open. So yes, PLO and government are two very important elements, but not only these, you have to add to that achieving the reunification, and you have to add to that things related to the legal framework and changing things such as the election law, for instance. And we need also to agree on a body that should be entrusted with implementing whatever is agreed upon by national dialogue. And should take responsibilities for a while until the normal or natural bodies such as the Central Council and the Executive Committee of the PLO and the government takes charge.
Can we talk a little bit about the Arab states? what would you say to the Arab states who normalized relations with Israel, and it was done specifically over the heads of the Palestinians, and specifically avoiding mention of a Palestinian state? At least that was done from former President Trump's end and Kushner's end.
Yeah.
What would you say to those Arab states that signed those deals now?
Yes, let me first say that I am strong believers in the Arab solidarity with the question of Palestine, and that Arabs generally present the leverage of the Palestinian struggle. Without Arab dimension, frankly, it's going to be extremely difficult, to say the least, for the Palestinians alone. So this is the starting point. We are for Arab solidarity and are for Arab consensus, and we need always to build the kind of Arab consensus around the Palestinian cause in a way that would help the cause and help the Palestinian people. Now, on the issue of policies or actions taken by some Arab states, let me clarify this. One, what they did is not even the opposite or the reversal of the Arab Peace Initiative. It's worse than that, because the Arab Peace Initiative was saying that Israel, if Israel withdraw, we will normalize relations with it. So the reversal would be, we will normalize relations and we expect Israel to withdraw. What they did recently is that we are normalizing relationship without withdrawal. So it's much worse than the reversal of the Arab Peace Initiative. That's number one. Number two, actually, I don't see what's in it for them even. From the national interest point of view of those states. At some point, the Israelis and the Americans sang the song of Iran is the central threat against the Gulf states, and it's not Israel. On the contrary, these states need to forge an alliance with Israel. That proved to be nonsense, including after the bombardment or the targeting of Aramco in Saudi Arabia. Neither the United States nor Israel rushed to the rescue of Aramco or anyone else. And anyone who reads well and watched well can clearly see that this is not the cards. On the other hand, even if we contemplate some kind of economic trade, balanced interest, mutual interest, this also, and again, is false, it's nonsense. And once more, if anyone reads carefully and watches carefully, he or she would know easily that this is not the Israeli way. So I don't see the interest, even from a narrow nationalistic point of view of those states. I think they made a mistake. I think it's not sustainable. But I think, on the other hand, that we need to have dialogue. We need to have frank dialogue with all of our Arab brothers. We need to regain their respect, and that's one of the problems there. We need to regain their respect. We need to speak with them the truth. And we need to try again to forge common position in the interest of the Palestinian people. That is not impossible, in spite of everything. That's still possible, but it takes efforts and it takes some times, and we have to be ready to do precisely that.
Well, what do you think of Mohammed Dahlan and his? Because he was also there was a list that was also going to represent his faction in the elections that have been cancelled, and his relationship with the United Arab Emirates. Would you say he's part of the problem, or is he a brother as well?
Well, this story, of course, did have several episodes, but let me deal with the last part of it. That's the elections. I did say publicly that this phenomenon is not one that would be accepted by the Palestinian people easily, and especially because of the Emirati policy and what the United Arab Emirates did with regard to the Palestinian cause generally. But I did say that many of the cadres, men and women working with this group are our brothers and sisters, and doors should be open for reconciliation. And this is one thing that I try to press very hard, the internal reconciliation within Fatah, whether with us, with me, and with the group that works with me, or with this group, irrespective of whatever position is there vis-a-vis Mr. X or Mr. Y. But as a phenomenon, we need to cooperate and we need to absorb that phenomenon.
And could we talk briefly about the position of Marwan Barghouti, who's on your list? I think he's now in solitary confinement after a statement he made. I think the Israelis were very concerned about a new front opening up in the prisons. What is? Have you had any word of him?
Unfortunately, there is no direct communication, as one would expect. As you said, he is in solitary confinement, and it's not easy to communicate. But since we started our National Democratic Assembly, I personally said, and many other colleagues said, that the natural place for Marwan is to be with this movement, with this assembly, and we pushed hard for all of us to be in the same place, asking for renewal and for change, and pushing for certain results during the elections. So Marwan at the end is not with us. He was not on the list of Al-Hurriya, but his wife and other friends of his are on the list, or were on the list, before the whole elections get cancelled or abrogated. And of course, that shows his full support of Al-Hurriya list, or the Freedom list. Something that I think reflected very positively on the list generally. We did some serious efforts to achieve the unity of the one list that materialized. And it was an experience that I personally am proud of. Now we are going back to reactivate the National Democratic Assembly and to move forward. But if we go back, as we should, to the elections, we might have the same experience yet again.
If there were genuinely free elections in Palestine, and you actually had the will of the people, all the Palestinians who could vote, would Marwan be the new president of Palestine?
Well, I have no doubt in mind that had we had the elections normally proceeding as it was planned in May, results would have been completely different, including during the legislative elections as well as the presidential elections. I have no doubt in mind that with regard to the legislative elections, Al-Hurriya or the Freedom list would have scored high and achieved probably surprising results. And I also have no doubt in my mind that had Marwan Barghouti run for the presidency, he would have won. And we stated clearly, repeatedly, that for us, we do support him, we do support his candidatures, and if needed, we would be ready to present the candidatures.
One final question. What is your message to Benjamin Netanyahu?
Go home. Simple. I think it's high time for Benjamin Netanyahu to leave the theater and leave it for other leaders. We need new ideas, fresh blood, new everything, and change is just the way of life. You can't just freeze the situation as it's for as long as it was frozen.
Many thanks. Thank you so much, Dr. Qudwa, for your time, and I hope to
Okay.
meet you in the flesh.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.